The films which you are about to see are the accounts of the nightmarish maulings which befell two men in Africa. Originally from the small village of Ndir in the central region of Kenya, north of the capital city of Nairobi, 50-year-old David Njoroge was a man who had to hustle every day to make ends meet. He lived alone, but was also part of a close-knit community in his small village, which was good for safety as Kenya happens to be one of the most diverse in its biodiversity, with animals such as the African lion, leopard, cheetah, giraffe, buffalo, elephants, rhinos, wildebeest, rare black rhinos, crocodiles, African wild dogs, zebras, baboons, impalas, and of course, the main subject of our film, the massive hippopotamus. Hippos themselves are the third largest living land mammal behind elephants and white rhinos. They weigh between 1.5 and 5 tons and can grow between 6 feet and 16.5 feet in length. These large herbivores, which spend most of their lives in the water, are considered the most aggressive and dangerous in all of Africa. The number of people killed by hippos every year is unknown, but it is estimated to range from 500 to 3,000 a year, making them the world's deadliest mammal to humans. These fearsome animals with their ferocious jaw force, unique mouth size, and sharp teeth can easily bisect a human body in half in a single bite. And the chances of injuries increases as humans encroach on their natural habitats of these animals. Hippos usually only attack if they feel threatened. For example, if someone is standing between them and their water source, or if a mother feels that their young is being threatened. And to make things even scarier, usually a fully grown adult hippo can run up to 18 miles an hour despite their short legs and stocky build. Which now brings us back to our story at hand. On the night of September 11, 2012, around 7 p.m., David had just returned home from a long day of working and hustling for his daily expenses and began to eat his dinner for the night, when all of a sudden he heard a loud crashing sound coming from outside, and only moments later he would hear multiple people screaming and calling out for help. Wanting to help in any way he could, he hurried and rushed out, thinking that at first a thief had probably been cornered stealing some produce from a farm. In reality though, it was something much worse. I stepped outside of my house when I heard the neighbors screaming, and that's when I came face to face with the beast. Once it noticed David, the hippo plowed through him, simultaneously biting off a sizable amount of flesh from his right shoulder. I fell to the ground and played dead. The beast then mauled over David for a second before being scared off by the other villagers. David was then rushed off to Maragua Level 4 Hospital, where Dr. Irene Nurambra would go on to say, "The patient is stable and expected to undergo major surgery." David was then able to eventually make a full recovery, but still with a pretty nasty scar left on his shoulder. And in the end, the locals then asked the Kenyan Wildlife Services to come to their aid and help mitigate human-wildlife conflict in the area. Paul Templar was a river safari guide who lives in Zimbabwe near the Zambezi River, a river known to have lots of wildlife around such as elephants, buffaloes, water bucks, zebras, impalas, kudas, and of course the ferocious hippopotamus. One such hippo has been increasingly aggressive and has been on an absolutely nightmarish tear through anyone foolish enough to enter the water, and many people have been so foolish. On the day of March 9th, 1996, Paul and his best friend Mike McNamara were both enjoying a quiet afternoon off from work at the local pub, when unexpectedly another river guy came to the pub by the name of Evans. He proposed to the men that they come and help with a nice and easy trip through the Zambezi River with a few tourists. And thinking to himself, well, I can either lounge around this pub all day or I can be a guide and go on this trip. Well, at least to say, he chose the trip. A decision that in all honesty, he would later regret. A few moments later, still around early afternoon, Paul, Mike, and Evans all met up with the forest tour guide Ben and the rest of the tourists and prepared to take what was known as a wine route, where essentially the tourists just sit back and relax while the guides do all the paddling and touring, as it all lasts around about an hour and a half. Over the past few months though, a lone bull hippo has been aggressively attacking anyone who comes into his territory, a situation that Paul has found himself in 6 months prior. And now as they were dangerously going to cross paths again, Paul was on the lookout just in case they ran into the lone hippo once again. When they got to the area where the hippo usually is patrolling, they didn't see any sign of him, but knew he was still in the area. So they decided to take the more narrow channels to canoe through, and at first everything was going good and seemed okay. As they came around the bend though, Paul almost immediately noticed a large group of hippos relaxing in the water, and knowing exactly what could happen if startled, Paul and the group made sure to row extra slow and cautiously as to not upset any of the hippos, all the while trying to keep their heads on a swivel so as to see any submerged hippos lurking just beneath them. Everything at this time seemed to be okay as they were about to move on to faster moving waters. Though as Paul turned his head to look around, almost with no warning at all, he sees Evans and his canoe getting tossed up into the air and quickly being dragged off by the strong current of the river by the massive bull hippo that they were warned about in the beginning. Paul then quickly paddled to be in between Evans and the hippo to try and save Evans from being mauled. Though horrendously as Paul does this, the hippo, almost like a true monster, appeared out of the water and immediately began to try and attack Paul and his canoe. And even more horrific, Mike and Ben could do nothing but watch as the hippo was between them and Evans. Luckily for Paul though, a few moments later he was able to struggle free from the jaws of the hippo and slip out. A few seconds later, Paul then came face to face with Evans struggling in the water. Paul knew something wasn't right, and in less than a few seconds, Evan was overtaken by the strong current and drowned in front of Paul. Without even a second to mourn though, or even a second to think, the hippo zeroes back in on Paul and starts chewing on his legs, tearing the skin and bones alike. Then it took Paul's body into its mouth, ripping into his torso with its 17-inch tusks. He could feel them tearing into his back and stomach. Paul thought for sure he would end up biting him in half right there. But instead, the hippo does something more sinister. He drags Paul down into the river to drown him. I remember I could see the different hues of green and yellow in the sunlight shining off the water's surface. Meanwhile, on the river's surface, Mike, Ben, and the tourists all look on with horror as the river goes completely quiet with only the large pool of blood left behind. And now, thinking that two friends are dead, they prepare to get Evans and rush out of the area when all of a sudden, Paul pops back out of the water like a fired missile. Barely alive, Mike sees his friend and races over to grab him just in case the hippo comes back for a third and final attack. Paul grabs onto the front of Mike's canoe and holds on for dear life while Mike paddles back. Only thing was though, the hippo wasn't done and decides to grab onto Paul's legs in an attempt to drag him back down. And nightmarishly, the hippo then tried to swallow Paul whole without a second thought. Then all of a sudden, without any warning or really any reason, the hippo decides to back off and let Mike drag him back to safety. Unfortunately for Paul though, the hippo wasn't the only thing fighting against his life. In order to get Paul back to the bank of the river, Mike had to fight against horribly strong currents and Paul was losing his grip fast. Though through pure determination, Mike was able to fight against the current and get Paul to safety on the river's bank, where they then tried to provide the best first aid that they could despite the first aid kit having washed away a few moments prior. They managed to get his wounds wrapped up using the clean wrap from their food, as they also managed to put him back in the canoe as quickly as possible. Only thing was though, in order to get him to safety, they had to paddle back through the hippo's territory. Surprisingly though, the hippo let the group back through and they were able to quickly get Paul down the river and into the arms of a local medical crew who just so happened to be conducting emergency drills nearby. They then drove Paul almost 8 hours to the nearest hospital where they then received the most earth-shattering news. Unfortunately for Evans, it would take the recovery team another 2 whole days to find his body as it was rushed down the stream by the harsh current. As for Paul, his left arm was beyond repair and would have to be amputated above the elbow, but other than contracting gangrene, he was able to make a full recovery and move on with his life. And as for the rogue territorial hippo, well, he was never seen again as he most likely integrated into another group. With that being said though, may Evans rest in peace. And once again, thank you for watching. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons and turn on the notification bell for more content in the future. Goodbye for now.